Millionaire walks into court with his mistress and smile, but froze when the judge announced all assets are now hers. The champagne cork hit the marble floor with a sound that echoed through courtroom 9 like a gunshot. Barrett Holloway, a man who had spent 52 years believing the world bent to his will, watched it roll across the polished stone. His hand, still extended from where the bottle had slipped through his fingers, trembled in the air like a broken marionette. Judge Eleanor Pembroke looked down from her bench, her reading glasses catching the fluorescent light, and her voice cut through the silence with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. This court finds that Mrs. Delilah Ann Holloway is the sole and rightful owner of all property, business interests, and assets associated with Holloway Estate Wines. Mr. Holloway's claims are dismissed in their entirety. Barrett's lawyer, Mitchell Graves, shot to his feet, his jowls quivering. "Your Honor, this is unconscionable. My client built that empire from nothing. You cannot simply—" The judge raised one hand. The gesture was small, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. "Mr. Graves, your client built nothing. He signed documents he didn't bother to read. He committed perjury in his deposition. He systematically erased his wife's contributions from the public record. And then, he walked into my courtroom with his mistress and champagne to celebrate what he assumed would be his victory. I am not simply doing anything, Counselor. I am enforcing the legal agreements your client himself signed, agreements that stripped him of everything the moment he chose infidelity over integrity." She leaned forward, her eyes boring into Barrett. "Mr. Holloway, you didn't just lose your marriage today. You lost your empire, and you have no one to blame but yourself." The gavel came down. One sharp crack that sounded like the breaking of bones. Barrett turned his head slowly, as if moving through water, and his eyes found the woman sitting calmly at the defendant's table. Delilah Holloway, his wife of 23 years, the woman he had dismissed as nothing more than a comfortable accessory to his success, looked back at him with an expression of such serene certainty that his stomach turned to ice. She had done this. The quiet, accommodating woman he had taken for granted had just taken everything. And the most terrifying part was the small, knowing smile on her lips. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't revenge. It was simply the look of someone who had been playing chess while he was still learning checkers. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you handed them the keys to your entire life? Have you ever been so confident in your power that you stopped paying attention to the fine print? Barrett Holloway did. And today, you're going to hear exactly how a man's towering arrogance became the ladder his wife used to reclaim a kingdom he thought was his. This is not just a story about a divorce. This is a story about patience, strategy, justice, and the devastating consequences of underestimating the person who knows you best. If you love stories where karma is served ice cold, where the underestimated rise and the arrogant fall, then you are in exactly the right place. Hit that like button right now, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, or just say I'm with you, Mr. Hearthline, because trust me, you will not want to miss a single moment of what happens next. This is Mr. Hearthline Stories, and today, we're diving into a tale that will remind you that the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. Back to a time when Barrett Holloway was not yet a millionaire. Back to when Delilah was not yet the woman who would destroy him. Back to a hardware store in Sonoma County, California, on a warm April afternoon 24 years ago, when two people met and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Delilah Crane stood in aisle 7 of Morrison's Hardware, staring at irrigation piping she couldn't afford, holding a calculator she didn't need because she already knew the math. 37 acres of dying vineyard, 4 generations of family legacy, and a bank account that had exactly $2,341 in it. The vineyard was killing her the same way it had killed her father. Slowly, expensively, with the kind of stubborn hope that turned into desperation somewhere around midnight when you were sitting at the kitchen table trying to figure out which bill you could ignore for another month. She was 24 years old. She had a master's degree in viticulture from UC Davis. She could tell you the pH balance of soil just by running it through her fingers. She could taste a wine and identify not just the grape, but the hillside it came from, the year it was harvested, and whether the winemaker had been paying attention or just going through the motions. But none of that knowledge mattered if she couldn't afford to save the land. "You're the Crane girl, aren't you?" The voice came from behind her, deep, confident, with a kind of easy charm that made you want to trust it. Delilah turned, The man standing there was about 30, broad-shouldered, with hands that looked like they'd built half the county. He wore jeans stained with honest dirt and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up. His smile was wide and genuine, the kind of smile that reached his eyes. "I am," Delilah said carefully. "And you are?" "Barrett Holloway. I do vineyard installations, irrigation, trellising, frost systems. I've driven past your property about 100 times. Beautiful land." She looked back at the piping. Beautiful land in terrible shape. He stepped closer, glancing at the cart she'd been filling and then abandoning. Filling and then abandoning. For the past 40 minutes. "Can I ask you something? What's your plan for the Crane place?" Delilah laughed. It came out more bitter than she intended. "My plan is to figure out how to save it before the bank takes it. But unless these pipes suddenly become free, I'm not sure that's happening." Barrett tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. But when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful, not predatory. "What if we made a deal?" Delilah raised an eyebrow. "What kind of deal?" "I help you restore the vineyard. Materials, labor, equipment, all of it. You teach me the wine business. We split it. 50-50. Partners." She stared at him. "Are you serious?" "Completely. Look, I'm good at what I do. I can build anything. But I'm working for other people, making them rich. I want to build something that's mine. And you've got the knowledge, the land, the vision. You just need someone to help you execute it." Delilah's first instinct was to say no. She'd learned early that when something sounded too good to be true, it usually was. But when she looked into Barrett Holloway's eyes, she didn't see a con man. She saw ambition. Hunger. The same desperation she felt every time she walked her family's land and imagined it being sold off to developers. "Why me?" she asked. "Why this vineyard?" "Because I've been watching it die for 5 years, and it makes me angry. Good land shouldn't go to waste. And because I can tell just by looking at you that you're not going to let it go without a fight. That's the kind of partner I want." It was the word partner that did it. Not employee, not helper, partner. Delilah Crane, a woman who had spent her entire life being underestimated, looked at Barrett Holloway and made a choice. She extended her hand. 50-50. Equal partners. If we do this, we do it right. Legal agreement, both names on everything. Barrett's grin could have lit up the entire store. He shook her hand firmly. "You got yourself a deal, partner." They shook hands in the hardware store parking lot while the California sun beat down on the asphalt. And in that moment, Delilah felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. If she had known then what that handshake would cost her, would she have still done it? Maybe, because the truth is, some lessons can only be learned through fire. The first 2 years were brutal in the way that building anything worthwhile is brutal. Barrett worked his contracting job from 6 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, then showed up at the vineyard and worked until the sun went down. Delilah managed every aspect of the viticulture, pruning the old vines back to health, testing soil, plotting out new plantings. He installed the irrigation system himself, spending weekends digging trenches in the hard Sonoma clay. She taught him how to read the vines, how to recognize stress, disease, readiness. They worked side by side in a kind of exhausted harmony, communicating in half sentences and shared glances. Somewhere in those long days, covered in dirt and possibility, they fell in love. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a lightning bolt. It was Barrett bringing her coffee exactly the way she liked it without her having to ask. It was Delilah explaining the history of each vineyard block, and him actually listening, asking questions, remembering details. It was the two of them sitting on the porch of the old farmhouse at sunset. Too tired to move, watching light pour over the vines like liquid gold. One evening in late September, with harvest 3 weeks away, Barrett turned to her. "Marry me." Delilah, half asleep against his shoulder, laughed. "Are you serious?" "Completely. We're already partners in business. Let's be partners in everything." She sat up, searching his face for doubt, for hesitation. She found none. "Are you asking me because you love me, or because it makes good business sense?" "I'm asking because I can't imagine doing any of this without you. The business, the life, any of it. You're the smartest person I've ever met, Delilah. You see things I don't. You make me better. So, yeah, I love you. and I want to spend the rest of my life building this dream with you." It was the most honest he would ever be with her. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." They were married in October in the vineyard, under an arbor Barrett built himself. 50 people attended, friends, family, neighbors, people who had watched Delilah fight for that land and wanted to see her win. She wore a simple white dress. He wore a suit he'd bought at a thrift store and had tailored to fit. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promising partnership, honesty, and shared dreams. And for a while, those promises held. Their first harvest came 2 weeks after the wedding. Delilah had spent months preparing, monitoring sugar levels, testing acidity, walking the vineyard at dawn to check the fruit. The grapes were perfect. Old Vine Zinfandel, Petite Syrah, and Carignan, the heritage varietals her great-grandfather had planted during Prohibition. She crafted the wine using techniques passed down through 4 generations. Minimal intervention, whole cluster fermentation, native yeast, aging in neutral French oak to let the fruit speak for itself. When she pulled the first barrel sample 6 months later, she knew they had something special. "Barrett, taste this." He swirled the wine, inhaled, sipped. His eyes widened. "Delilah, this is incredible. This doesn't taste like anything else out there." "That's because it's not trying to be anything else. It's exactly what it is. This land, this vintage, this moment. Nothing more, nothing less." Barrett stared at the glass, and she could see the wheels turning in his mind. He was already thinking about marketing, distribution, sales. She was thinking about the next vintage, about sustainability, about legacy. They were partners, but they were beginning to see the world very differently. "We need a name," Barrett said. "A brand." Delilah nodded. "Crane Vineyard. It's been in my family for 4 generations. That's the story we tell." Barrett frowned. "Crane sounds old, traditional. We need something that sounds like success, something bold." "Like what?" "Holloway Reserve." Delilah felt something tighten in her chest. "That's your name?" "Exactly. It sounds strong, authoritative. People will remember it. But this is my family's land, Barrett. This wine is my great-grandfather's legacy, and it'll be our legacy," he said, taking her hand. "Babe, I'm not trying to erase your family. I'm trying to build ours. Holloway sounds like a winner. Trust me on this." She should have fought harder. She should have insisted. But she loved him. She trusted him. And she believed that they were building something together, that the name on the bottle mattered less than the wine inside. "Okay," she said quietly. Holloway Reserve. The first vintage of Holloway Reserve sold out in 3 months. The second vintage won a gold medal at the San Francisco Chronicle Wine Competition. By year 5, they were distributing to restaurants in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. By year 8, a bottle of Holloway Reserve was served at a state dinner at the White House. They were a success story, the small family vineyard that became a national brand. Barrett was invited to speak at wine industry conferences. Magazines wanted to profile him. He was charming, articulate, the perfect face for the brand. And with every interview, every profile, every award acceptance speech, Delilah's role got smaller. At first it was subtle. A journalist would ask about the winemaking, and Barrett would say, "We have an incredible team." Or, "The vineyard really speaks for itself." He'd mention Delilah in passing. "My wife has a great palate. She's very involved, as if she were an enthusiastic hobbyist rather than the master winemaker with the UC Davis degree who made every single decision from bud break to bottling. Delilah told herself it didn't matter. She didn't need the spotlight. She had the work, the land, the wine. That was enough. But Barrett had tasted fame, and it changed him the way a drug changes an addict. By year 10, he'd bought custom suits. By year 12, he'd bought a yacht and named it Terroir, which would have been funny if it weren't so painfully on the nose. By year 15, he was flying first class to wine festivals in Paris, Hong Kong, and Melbourne. Delilah stayed home. Someone had to manage the vineyard. Someone had to make the wine. Someone had to be the foundation while Barrett became the fireworks. Their daughter Grace was 17 when she came to Delilah with tears streaming down her face. "Mom, everyone at school is talking about it. Dad and some woman in New York. There are pictures online." Delilah's hands, steady even in the midst of crisis, took the phone from her daughter's trembling fingers. The photos were grainy, taken by someone with a telephoto lens, but clear enough. Barrett, exiting a hotel in Manhattan with a woman young enough to be his daughter, his hand on the small of her back, her face turned toward his, laughing. Delilah's world tilted on its axis, but her voice when she spoke was calm. "Go to your room, sweetheart. I'll handle this." When Barrett came home 3 days later, Delilah was waiting in the kitchen. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply placed printouts of the photos on the table in front of him. His face went pale, then red. He didn't deny it. "It was a mistake, Delilah. A stupid, meaningless mistake. I was drunk. She was there. It didn't mean anything. You had your hand on her back like she belonged to you. She doesn't. You do. You're my wife. You're my partner. This was nothing. Your daughter saw these photos, Barrett. Her friends sent them to her. Do you understand what you've done?" For a moment, genuine shame flickered across his face. "Just for a moment. I'll fix it. I'll make it right. I swear to you, Delilah, it will never happen again." And because she had 2 children who still believed their father was a good man, because she had spent 17 years building a life with this person, because some part of her still remembered the man who'd brought her coffee and built an arbor for their wedding, she made a choice. "I forgive you, but if it happens again, we're done. Do you understand me? Done. I understand. Thank you. I love you." He kissed her forehead. He went upstairs, and Delilah sat alone in the kitchen of the farmhouse her great-grandfather had built and felt something inside her heart go cold and quiet. She had forgiven him, but she no longer trusted him, and trust, once broken, is a door that never fully closes again. The next morning, Delilah made a phone call to an attorney whose name she'd gotten from a friend, a woman with a reputation for being brilliant, ruthless, and undefeated. Judith Blackwell's office was in downtown Sonoma, in a restored Victorian painted the color of thunderclouds. Judith herself was 62, with steel gray hair cut in a sharp bob and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. "Mrs. Holloway," Judith said, gesturing for Delilah to sit. "What can I do for you? I need to protect myself. From my husband." Delilah laid out the whole story. The partnership, the vineyard, the business, the affair. Judith listened without interrupting, making occasional notes on a legal pad. When Delilah finished, Judith leaned back in her chair. "Let me ask you a few questions. The land, the 37 acres, whose name is on the deed? Mine. It was my inheritance. Good. The business entity, Holloway Estate Wines. How is that structured?" "We have a partnership agreement. 50-50 ownership." "Is your husband involved in the actual winemaking?" "No. I make every decision. Harvest dates, blending, barrel selection, everything. He handles sales and marketing. So he's the face and you're the product, essentially." Judith made another note. "And he's having affairs, at least one that I know of. Do you want a divorce?" Delilah paused. The question hung in the air like smoke. "Not yet. I have 2 children. I want to keep the family intact if I can. But I need to protect myself. If he does this again, if he tries to push me out, I need to know I won't lose everything I built." "Smart," Judith said. "Very smart. Here's what I recommend. We draft a revised operating agreement for the business. We'll include protective clauses. If certain events occur, infidelity, financial malfeasance, abandonment, then ownership automatically transfers to you. Full control. He'd forfeit his stake. Can we do that?" "Absolutely, as long as he signs it." "Why would he sign something like that?" "Because we won't tell him what it really says. We'll bury the clause in legal language. We'll present it as routine business protection, estate planning, that sort of thing. If he doesn't read it carefully, and men like your husband rarely do, he'll sign it without thinking twice." Delilah felt a small flicker of something she hadn't felt in months. Power. Do it. Judith Blackwell spent 3 weeks drafting an operating agreement that was a work of legal art. It was 22 pages long. The protective clause was on page 17, section 7, subsection 3. Buried in language so dense that even most attorneys would skim past it. The clause was simple in its devastation. If either party engaged in conduct detrimental to the business, including but not limited to infidelity, the non-offending party would assume full ownership and control. The offending party's shares would be forfeited. No compensation, no negotiation. It was a legal landmine. And Barrett Holloway signed it on a Tuesday afternoon without reading past the first page. Delilah had presented it to him in his home office, where he was on his phone, texting someone, distracted. "What's this?" he asked, barely looking up. "Updated operating agreement." Judith Blackwell drew it up. "It's just business protection stuff. Estate planning. Making sure if anything happens to either of us, the business is secure for the kids." Barrett scrawled his signature on the line, still looking at his phone. "You handle this stuff better than me anyway, babe." He handed it back to her. Didn't ask a single question. Didn't read a single word beyond where his name was typed. Delilah took the document, hands steady, face calm. She had it notarized that same day, filed with the county within the week, and then she waited. Because Delilah Crane Holloway had learned something crucial in her years of viticulture. You don't harvest the grapes the moment they're ripe. You wait, you watch, you let them hang on the vine just a little bit longer, developing complexity, depth, character. Patience, she knew, was the difference between a good wine and a great one. And she was willing to wait as long as it took for Barrett to destroy himself. She didn't have to wait long. The affairs continued. Barrett barely bothered hiding them anymore. There was a gallery owner in San Francisco, a wine journalist from France, a boutique hotel owner in Napa. Delilah documented each one quietly, methodically. Credit card statements, hotel receipts, photographs taken by a private investigator Judith had recommended. She filed everything in a locked cabinet in the Vineyard office. Evidence, insurance, ammunition. Her children were in college now. Grace at Stanford studying environmental science. Her son James at Berkeley studying business. They knew their father was not the man he pretended to be. They'd stopped asking why their mother stayed. Delilah stayed because she was waiting for the perfect moment. The moment when Barrett's arrogance would be at its peak. The moment when he would overplay his hand so badly that his fall would be complete. That moment came in the form of Sloan Mercer. Sloan was 29, a former model turned lifestyle influencer with 200,000 Instagram followers and the depth of a champagne flute. She and Barrett met at a wine auction in Los Angeles, where she'd been hired to post photos for the event's sponsor. Barrett saw her across the room, all honey blonde hair, and a dress that cost more than most people. His monthly rent, and he was smitten in the way that men having midlife crises are always smitten. Within a month, Sloan was flying to Sonoma on weekends. Within 3 months, Barrett had bought her a condo in San Francisco. Within 6 months, he'd stopped pretending he was coming home at all. And then, on a Thursday morning over breakfast, Barrett said the words Delilah had been waiting years to hear. "I want a divorce." Delilah looked up from her coffee. Her expression was carefully neutral. "Okay." Barrett blinked, clearly surprised. "That's it? Just okay? What do you want me to say, Barrett?" "I don't know. I thought you'd be upset. I thought we'd fight. We've been fighting for 5 years. I'm tired. If you want a divorce, file the papers." He leaned back in his chair, relief washing over his face. "I'm glad you're being reasonable about this, Delilah. I'll make sure you're taken care of. The house in Carmel, alimony, a good settlement. You'll be comfortable. And the vineyard?" Barrett laughed. "Come on. The vineyard is the business. That's mine. But don't worry, I'll be fair." Fair? The word tasted like ash in her mouth. But she smiled. A small, calm smile. "I'm sure you will be." He reached across the table and squeezed her hand, and she let him, feeling nothing. Barrett Holloway thought he was setting himself free. He thought he was trading in an old model for a new one. He thought he was finally going to live the life he deserved. What he didn't know was that he had just activated the landmine, and Delilah was about to watch him explode. That night, she called Judith Blackwell. "He wants a divorce." "Good," Judith said. "Are you ready?" "I've been ready for 3 years." "Then let's burn his world down." The divorce papers were filed 3 weeks later. Barrett's attorney, Mitchell Graves, was a man who specialized in high-net-worth divorces, which meant he specialized in making sure wealthy men kept their wealth and discarded wives got just enough to stay quiet. Mitchell drew up a settlement offer that he clearly thought was generous. $15 million. The estate in Carmel. $75,000 a month in alimony for 10 years. He presented it to Judith with the confidence of a man who'd won this exact fight 100 times before. Judith read it, smiled, and handed it back. "No." Mitchell frowned. "I'm sorry. My client rejects this offer in its entirety. Mrs. Holloway is a non-earning spouse. This is an exceptionally fair settlement. Mrs. Holloway is not a non-earning spouse, Mr. Graves. She is the sole legal owner of Holloway Estate Wines. Your client owns nothing. He forfeited his shares years ago when he violated the operating agreement he signed, an operating agreement that included a morality clause triggered by infidelity. Mitchell's face went pale. That's absurd. No one would sign such an agreement. Your client did. I have the notarized, filed, legally binding document right here. Would you like to see it? She slid a copy across the table. Mitchell's hands shook as he picked it up. His eyes scanned the pages, faster and faster, until he found Section 7, Subsection 3. He read it 3 times, and with each reading, his face lost more color. He doesn't remember signing this. Ignorance of the law is not a defense, Mr. Graves. And ignorance of a document you personally signed is certainly not a defense. Your client thought he was too important to read the fine print. He was wrong. Mitchell gathered his papers with trembling hands. I'll need to consult with my client. You do that. And when you're done explaining to him that he just lost everything, let us know. If he'd like to settle this quietly or if he'd prefer we do this in open court. My client is prepared for either option. Barrett's response came 2 days later. He would not settle quietly. He refused to believe he'd lost anything. He insisted the agreement was fraudulent, coerced, invalid. He wanted his day in court. He wanted to prove publicly that Delilah was nothing without him. Judith smiled when she got the news. Perfect, she said. I was hoping he'd choose the dramatic option. And so the date was set. Courtroom 9. Judge Eleanor Pembroke presiding. The dissolution of marriage between Barrett James Holloway and Delilah Ann Holloway. Barrett decided to make a spectacle of it. He'd been performing his whole life. Why stop now? On the morning of the hearing, he arrived at the Sonoma County Courthouse with Sloan on his arm, dressed like they were attending a yacht party rather than a legal proceeding, and in a move so audacious, so dripping with contempt, that even the court reporters gasped. His assistant carried in an ice bucket containing 2 bottles of Dom Perignon rose and crystal champagne flutes. He was going to celebrate his victory in front of the woman he was discarding. He was going to toast to his freedom, his wealth, his new life. The gallery filled with reporters, curious onlookers, and a few people from the wine industry who'd heard rumors and wanted to see the show. Barrett held court in the hallway before the proceedings began, shaking hands, making jokes, radiating the absolute certainty of a man who believed himself untouchable. Inside the courtroom, Delilah sat beside Judith, wearing a simple dove-gray dress and the wedding ring she had not yet removed. She looked calm, composed, almost serene. She caught Barrett's eye as he swaggered in with Sloan giggling beside him and the champagne glinting in its silver bucket. He winked at her, actually winked, and Delilah smiled back, because she knew something he didn't. She knew that in approximately 90 minutes, Barrett Holloway would lose everything. His business, his reputation, his future, and she knew that the champagne he'd brought to celebrate would remain unopened, because there would be nothing to celebrate. The bailiff's voice boomed through the courtroom. All rise. Judge Eleanor Pembroke entered. She was 68 years old, with silver hair, sharp cheekbones, and a reputation for suffering no fools. Her eyes swept the room and landed immediately on the ice bucket at Barrett's feet. One eyebrow rose a fraction of an inch. Be seated. The room sat. The air hummed with anticipation. This was not going to be an ordinary proceeding. Everyone could feel it. Judge Pembroke arranged her files, adjusted her reading glasses, and looked down at the 2 tables. We are here today for the dissolution of marriage between Barrett James Holloway and Delilah Ann Holloway. Before we begin, I feel compelled to address the... She paused, glancing at the champagne, refreshments that have accompanied Mr. Holloway to my courtroom. Barrett stood, flashing his most charming smile. Your Honor, I apologize if it seems inappropriate. I'm simply in good spirits. Mr. Holloway, this is a court of law, not a private club. The champagne will remain unopened for the duration of these proceedings, or I will hold you in contempt. Is that understood? The smile tightened on Barrett's face. Understood, Your Honor. Good. Mr. Graves, you may present your opening statement. Mitchell Graves rose, buttoning his suit jacket with the practiced ease of a man who'd done this 1,000 times. He was a bulldog of a lawyer, expensive, experienced, and confident. Your Honor, he began, his voice smooth and measured. We are here today to dissolve a marriage that sadly has run its course. This is never a pleasant process, but my client, Mr. Holloway, wishes to handle it with grace and generosity. He paced slowly, hands clasped behind his back. Barrett Holloway is a self-made man. He built Holloway Estate Wines from nothing, from dirt and dreams, into one of the most respected wine brands in the country. Through his vision, his tireless work ethic, and his business acumen, he created an empire. Delilah sat perfectly still. Judith made a small note on her legal pad. Mrs. Holloway, Mitchell continued, was a supportive spouse. She maintained their home. She hosted gatherings for investors and clients. She was, by all accounts, a gracious partner during the years of Mr. Holloway's rise to prominence. He turned slightly toward Delilah's table, his expression one of practiced sympathy. And in recognition of her years of companionship, Mr. Holloway is offering a settlement that can only be described as extraordinarily generous. $15 million tax-free. Full ownership of the estate in Carmel, valued at approximately $8 million. And ongoing spousal support of $75,000 per month for 10 years. He paused, letting the numbers hang in the air. Several people in the gallery murmured, "Your Honor, this is a settlement that will allow Mrs. Holloway to live in absolute comfort for the rest of her life without ever needing to work. It is more than fair. It is a testament to my client's character that despite the end of their marriage, he wishes to ensure she is well cared for." The phrase "cared for" landed with a condescension that made Delilah's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "We ask that the court recognize the generosity of this offer and grant the dissolution with the proposed division of assets. Thank you, Your Honor." Mitchell sat down, looking supremely confident. Barrett gave him an approving nod and reached for Sloane's hand, squeezing it. Judge Pembroke looked at the defense table. "Miss Blackwell, you may respond." Judith Blackwell rose. She didn't pace. She didn't perform. She simply stood, her hands resting lightly on the table, and when she spoke, her voice was quiet, but carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Your Honor, I want to thank Mr. Graves for that compelling performance. He paints a lovely picture. A benevolent king bestowing riches upon a loyal subject. A grateful husband providing for the little woman who kept his home fires burning while he built his empire." She paused. "It's a beautiful story. It's also complete fiction." The courtroom went still. Barrett's smile faltered. "We are not here to negotiate a severance package for Mrs. Holloway's years of domestic service. We are not here to accept a generous gift from a magnanimous man. We are here because my client has decided, after 23 years of watching her contributions be erased, her work be credited to someone else, and her partnership be reduced to a footnote to correct the record." Mitchell started to stand. "Your Honor, this is..." Judge Pembroke raised a hand. "Sit down, Mr. Graves. This is an opening statement. You'll have your turn," Judith continued, her voice gaining strength. "The truth, Your Honor, is that Barrett Holloway did not build an empire from nothing. He built it from land he did not own, using knowledge he did not possess, and creating a product he had no idea how to make. Everything Mr. Holloway claims as his, every award, every bottle, every dollar, rests on a foundation laid entirely by my client." She turned and looked directly at Barrett. "Delilah Holloway owns the land. Delilah Holloway makes the wine. And due to an operating agreement that Mr. Holloway signed 7 years ago, an agreement he apparently didn't bother to read, Delilah Holloway owns 100% of the business." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Barrett shot to his feet, his face flushing red. "That's insane. That's a lie." "Mr. Holloway, sit down," Judge Pembroke said sharply. "Your Honor," Mitchell said, standing again, "this is a desperate and fantastical claim." "Is it, Mr. Graves?" Judith asked calmly. "Because I have documents. I have witnesses. I have legally binding agreements signed by your client. We are not here to divide marital assets. We are here to confirm ownership. And by the time we're finished, the record will show that your client owns absolutely nothing." She sat down. The silence that followed was electric. Judge Pembroke leaned back in her chair, studying both tables. When she spoke, her voice was measured, but edged with curiosity. "Miss Blackwell, you are making an extraordinary claim. I trust you have more than rhetoric to support it." "We do, Your Honor. We have documents, witnesses, and the truth." Mr. Holloway, in his arrogance, seems to have forgotten the foundation of his own success. "We are simply here to remind him." "Very well," the judge said. "You may present your evidence." Judith stood and picked up the first exhibit from her table. Your Honor, the foundation of this case rests on 3 irrefutable facts. First, ownership of the land. Second, creation of the product. Third, legal control of the business entity. We will prove all 3 belong solely to Mrs. Holloway. She walked to the center of the courtroom. Let's begin with the land. Exhibit A. She handed copies to the judge and to Mitchell Graves, who accepted them with visible apprehension. This is the deed to the 37-acre property in Sonoma County, known historically as Crane Vineyard and currently operating as Holloway Estate. The deed, Your Honor, shows an unbroken chain of title through the Crane family for 4 generations. The current title holder, as of 24 years ago, when the property passed via inheritance, upon the death of her father, is Delilah Ann Crane, now Delilah Holloway. Mitchell stood. Your Honor, while the property may have been inherited by Mrs. Holloway, it was developed into a commercial vineyard through my client's investment of time, labor, and significant capital. That creates shared equity, does it, Mr. Graves? Judith interrupted smoothly. Because California is a community property state, which typically would support your argument if we were discussing property acquired during the marriage. But this land was Mrs. Holloway's separate property, inherited prior to the marriage. Any improvements made to it would only create a shared interest if Mr. Holloway could prove he made direct, documented financial contributions. She turned to Barrett, who was gripping the armrest of his chair. Mr. Holloway, in your deposition, you stated that you personally funded the vineyard restoration. Is that correct? Mitchell leaned over and whispered urgently to Barrett. But Barrett, his ego overrode whatever caution his lawyer was trying to instill. He leaned forward to the microphone. Yes, I did all the work. I rebuilt that vineyard from scratch. I see. Then perhaps you can explain Exhibit B. Another document was presented to the court. Judith's assistant placed copies before the judge and opposing counsel. This, Your Honor, is a detailed financial accounting of all expenses related to the vineyard restoration between the years 1999 and 2003, prepared by the bookkeeper Mrs. Holloway hired in year 1 of the business. Every irrigation fitting, every trellis post, every piece of equipment, documented and sourced. Judith's voice was clinical, precise, devastating. The materials were purchased using a farm improvement loan taken out, solely in Mrs. Holloway's name, secured against the land she owned. The loan documents are included in this exhibit. You provided labor, Mr. Holloway. Skilled labor, certainly. But you were compensated for that labor with a 50% partnership stake in the business entity. You weren't an investor. You were a contractor who negotiated equity in lieu of cash payment. Barrett's face flushed a deep, furious red. That's not, we were building it together. It was our dream. Your dream. Her land. Her financial risk. Her loan that she spent 7 years repaying. Judith moved forward without pause, not giving Mitchell time to formulate an objection. Which brings us to the wine itself. The product that bears the Holloway name and generates the income Mr. Graves insists his client built. Tell me, Mr. Holloway, what is your formal education in viticulture? Barrett leaned back, crossing his arms defensively. I don't need formal education. I learned by doing. You learned from whom? Silence. Barrett's jaw worked, but no words came out. Let me help you, Judith said. You learned from my client, who holds a master's degree in viticulture and enology from the University of California, Davis. She taught you everything you know about wine. Isn't that true? We worked together. Answer the question, please. Did Mrs. Holloway teach you about winemaking, or did you already possess that knowledge when you met her? She taught me some things, but I had the vision. The vision, Judith repeated. Your Honor, we'd like to call our first witness. Miss Patricia Owens. An elderly woman with white hair and kind eyes made her way to the witness stand. She moved slowly, with the careful gait of someone whose body had logged decades of physical labor. She was sworn in, and when she sat down, she looked directly at Delilah, with an expression of such loyalty and affection that it spoke volumes. Miss Owens, Judith began gently, please state your occupation for the court. I'm retired now, Patricia said, her voice clear and steady. But I worked as the cellar master at Holloway Estate for 19 years. From the very beginning, practically. And in that role, who did you report to? Delilah, Mrs. Holloway. She was the winemaker. She made every decision about the wine. Can you elaborate on that for the court? Patricia nodded. Delilah decided when to harvest based on the fruit. She managed the fermentation. She chose the barrels, did the blending, made every call about when a wine was ready to bottle. I carried out her instructions, but she was the one with the vision and the knowledge. And Mr. Holloway's role? Patricia glanced apologetically at Barrett. He was the face of the brand. He traveled to wine festivals, did tastings with distributors, entertained clients. He was very good at selling the wine, but he didn't make it. Delilah made the wine. In your 19 years at the winery, did you ever see Mr. Holloway in the cellar making winemaking decisions? No. He'd come down sometimes for photo shoots or when important buyers visited. But the actual work, that was all Delilah and our team. Thank you, Ms. Owens. No further questions. Mitchell declined to cross-examine. There was no point. Patricia Owens was credible, sympathetic, and had just confirmed what Judith had claimed. Judith called 2 more witnesses. A vineyard manager who testified that Delilah walked the vineyard every single morning during growing season, that she made all decisions about canopy, management, irrigation, and harvest timing. Then a former sales distributor who admitted that while Barrett was the public face, every buyer knew the quality came from Delilah's winemaking. The portrait being painted was devastatingly clear. Barrett Holloway had been a salesman, a very good salesman, but the product he sold, the brand he represented, the empire he claimed, none of it was his creation. Judith returned to the center of the courtroom. Your Honor, we have now established that Mrs. Holloway owned the land and created the product, but we must still address the ownership of the business entity itself. Holloway Estate Wines Incorporated. She produced another document. This is the original partnership agreement, signed 24 years ago when the business was formed. As you can see, it designates equal ownership. 50% to Barrett Holloway, 50% to Delilah Holloway. Mitchell perked up slightly. Exactly, Your Honor. Equal ownership. Which means in a divorce, the business asset would be divided, and my client's settlement offer more than accounts for that. I'm not finished, Mr. Graves. Judith's voice cut through his nascent hope like a knife through silk. The original partnership agreement was superseded 7 years ago by a revised operating agreement. Exhibit G. The new document was distributed. Mitchell grabbed his copy, his eyes scanning frantically. Judge Pembroke read hers carefully, her expression unreadable. This revised operating agreement, Judith explained, was drafted at Mrs. Holloway's request and signed by both parties. It was notarized. It was filed with the county clerk. It is a legally binding contract. She paused, letting the tension build. The agreement contains a clause, Section 7, Subsection 3, that is remarkably clear. I'll read it for the record. She read slowly, enunciating every word. In the event that either party engages in conduct detrimental to the business, including but not limited to financial malfeasance, criminal activity, public scandal, or infidelity, the non-offending party shall immediately assume full ownership and control of the business entity. The offending party's shares shall be forfeited without compensation or negotiation. The courtroom went silent. Not a whisper, not a breath, just crushing, absolute silence. Barrett's face drained of all color. He looked at Mitchell, then at the document in front of his lawyer, then at Judith, his mouth opening and closing like a fish drowning in air. That's, he started, his voice hoarse. No, I didn't agree to that. Your signature says otherwise, Mr. Holloway. Judith held up a blown-up image of the signature page, projected onto a screen. There, in Barrett's distinctive scrawl, was his signature, right beneath the section that had just destroyed him. I didn't read it. He was standing now, his voice rising. You tricked me. I never would have signed that if I'd known. Judge Pembroke's voice cut through his panic like a guillotine. Mr. Holloway, are you telling this court that you signed a legal document governing the ownership of your business without reading it? Barrett stammered. She said it was just routine business stuff, estate planning. Did Mrs. Holloway physically prevent you from reading the document? No, but did she misrepresent what the document was? She said it was for business protection, which it was, Judge Pembroke said coldly. It protected the business from your behavior. Mr. Holloway, you are a businessman who has signed countless contracts in your career. You are expected to read what you sign. Ignorance is not a legal defense. Mitchell Graves was on his feet, his face red, sweat beading on his forehead. Your Honor, even if we accept that my client signed this document, surely there must be some consideration for the circumstances. This clause is unconscionable. It's punitive. No reasonable person would agree to forfeit an entire business empire for personal conduct. Judith turned to face him, her expression serene. Mr. Graves, your client didn't just engage in personal conduct. He engaged in a pattern of infidelity that spanned years. He publicly humiliated my client. He brought his current mistress to this courthouse today. He violated the trust that was the foundation of their partnership, both personal and professional. The clause exists precisely because men like your client believe they can betray their partners without consequence. Mitchell opened his mouth, then closed it. He had no response, because sitting 3 feet away from Barrett, still draped on his arm like an expensive accessory, was Sloane Mercer, living, breathing proof of everything Judith had just said. Judge Pembroke looked at Mitchell with something approaching pity. Mr. Graves, do you have any legal basis to challenge the validity of this operating agreement? Any evidence of fraud, coercion, or misrepresentation? Mitchell shuffled through his papers desperately, knowing he had nothing. We would need time to investigate, Your Honor. To determine the circumstances under which this was signed. You've had months to investigate, Mr. Graves. This document was filed with the county 7 years ago. It's been a matter of public record. Your failure to discover it during discovery is not this court's problem. She turned her attention to Judith. Miss Blackwell, you mentioned infidelity as the triggering event. I assume you have evidence to support this claim? Extensive evidence, Your Honor. We'd like to submit Exhibits H through M. Judith's assistant brought forward a thick folder. Inside were photographs, credit card statements, hotel receipts, and sworn affidavits. The evidence was organized chronologically, spanning 5 years. Each affair documented with the precision of a prosecutor building a criminal case. The photographs were particularly damning. Barrett with various women at hotels, restaurants, wine festivals, his hand on a waist, a kiss in a parking lot, exiting a hotel room at 2 a.m. Each image was time-stamped, geotagged, and cross-referenced with credit card charges. Judith walked the judge through each piece of evidence, her voice calm and clinical. Exhibit H, photos of Mr. Holloway with Amanda Chen, a gallery owner in San Francisco. These were taken over a 6-month period, 2 years ago. Exhibit 1, hotel charges in New York City, corresponding to visits from a wine journalist named Margot Devereaux. Exhibit J, receipts from a boutique hotel in Napa where Mr. Holloway spent multiple weekends with the proprietor. And finally, Exhibit M, Judith held up a photograph. This is Mr. Holloway with Miss Sloane Mercer, taken 18 months ago at a wine auction in Los Angeles. The beginning of his current relationship. She gestured to where Sloane sat in the courtroom, and every head turned. Sloane's face went pale. She looked at Barrett, then at the door, clearly calculating whether she could leave without making it worse. Miss Mercer accompanied Mr. Holloway to this courthouse today, Judith continued. He brought champagne to celebrate what he assumed would be his victory in divorcing my client. Your Honor, this is not a man who committed one mistake. This is a man who engaged in a systematic pattern of betrayal, documented over years, culminating in the public humiliation of bringing his mistress to divorce proceedings. Judge Pembroke studied the photographs in silence. When she looked up, her expression was one of such profound disapproval that Barrett physically recoiled. Mr. Holloway, the judge said slowly, in my 20 years on this bench, I have presided over many divorce proceedings. I have seen anger, sadness, greed, and cruelty, but I cannot recall ever seeing such a brazen display of contempt for the institution of marriage, for this court, and for basic human decency. She held up the photograph of him and Sloane at the wine auction. You signed an agreement that would cost you everything if you were unfaithful. And then you were unfaithful, repeatedly, publicly, without even the minimal discretion that might suggest some shred of shame or self-awareness. Your Honor, Barrett started, his voice desperate. Those affairs, they weren't about Delilah. They weren't about the business. They were personal mistakes. Personal mistakes, Judge Pembroke repeated. Mr. Holloway, you seem to labor under the misapprehension that your personal life and your business life are separate. They are not. You and Mrs. Holloway were not just married. You were business partners. The operating agreement you signed acknowledged that reality. It stated clearly that conduct detrimental to the partnership, including infidelity, would result in forfeiture of your stake. She leaned forward. You had a choice, Mr. Holloway. You could honor your commitments, both personal and professional, or you could pursue your extramarital affairs. You chose the affairs, and now you must live with the legal consequences of that choice. Barrett turned to look at Delilah. for the first time since the proceedings began, really looked at her. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her expression calm. She didn't look triumphant. She didn't look angry. She simply looked resolved. "You did this," he said, his voice breaking. "You planned this. You tricked me into signing that agreement." Delilah spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but clear. "I gave you a choice, Barrett. Every time you had an affair, you had a choice. You chose your ego and your pleasure over our family and our partnership. I didn't trick you. I protected myself from a man I could no longer trust. You were supposed to forgive me. You did before. I did forgive you before, and you did it again, and again, and again. At some point, forgiveness becomes complicity in your own destruction. I chose to survive you, Barrett. That's all." The simplicity of her words, the quiet dignity in her voice, landed with more force than any of Judith's legal arguments. This wasn't about revenge. This was about a woman who had finally decided she was worth more than the crumbs of respect her husband had been willing to offer. Mitchell made one last desperate attempt. "Your Honor, even if we accept the validity of the operating agreement, surely some division of assets is warranted. My client dedicated decades to building this business. On what basis, Mr. Graves?" Judge Pembroke's voice was sharp. "The legal agreement your client signed states clearly that upon violation of its terms, he forfeits his shares without compensation. Those were the terms he agreed to. But the business is worth hundreds of millions. You can't simply strip him of everything." "I'm not stripping him of anything. He stripped himself the moment he violated the agreement. The law is not concerned with whether the consequences are harsh, Mr. Graves. The law is concerned with whether they are legal. And these consequences are entirely legal, based on a contract your client willingly signed." She picked up the operating agreement, holding it like evidence of a crime. Mr. Holloway stood in this courtroom and testified under oath that he built his business from nothing, using his own capital and vision. We have now seen irrefutable evidence that he built it on land owned by his wife, using knowledge taught to him by his wife, and creating products made by his wife. He has systematically erased her contributions from the public record, taking sole credit for work that was not solely his. Her voice grew harder. He then signed an agreement protecting the business from his own misconduct, failed to read that agreement, violated its terms repeatedly, and now asks this court to rescue him from his own actions. I decline to do so. Barrett's breathing was ragged. Sloan had released his hand and shifted her chair away from him, putting distance between herself and the sinking ship. In the gallery, reporters were typing frantically. This wasn't just a divorce. This was a legal earthquake. Judge Pembroke continued, and her words fell like hammer blows. "This court finds that the revised operating agreement dated 7 years ago is valid, legally binding, and enforceable. The evidence presented proves beyond any doubt that Mr. Holloway engaged in conduct explicitly prohibited by that agreement, namely, repeated infidelity." She paused, looking directly at Barrett. "Therefore, pursuant to the terms of the agreement he himself signed, Barrett Holloway, his ownership stake in Holloway Estate Wines is hereby forfeited in its entirety. Mrs. Delilah Ann Holloway is the sole legal owner of the business. All associated assets, intellectual property, and real property." Barrett made a sound that was half gasp, half sob. No, this can't be happening." Furthermore, Judge Pembroke continued, given Mr. Holloway's documented pattern of misrepresenting the origins and ownership of the business, and his testimony under oath that directly contradicts the evidence presented today, this court finds that he has committed perjury. Mitchell went pale. "Your Honor, please. I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for potential prosecution. Mr. Holloway, you lied under oath about your financial contributions to the business. That is a crime." The judge picked up her gavel, and the courtroom held its collective breath. "Additionally, to prevent further misrepresentation and potential damage to the business Mrs. Holloway now solely owns, Mr. Holloway is hereby ordered to cease and desist from using the Holloway estate name, brand, or any associated trademarks in any professional capacity related to the wine industry." She raised the gavel. "This divorce is granted. All assets are awarded to Mrs. Delilah Holloway. Mr. Barrett Holloway is entitled to nothing from the marital estate, having forfeited his claims through his own documented misconduct." The gavel came down. The crack of wood on wood sounded like the snapping of bones, the shattering of an empire, the End of everything Barrett Holloway had believed about himself and his place in the world. This court is adjourned. For a moment, no one moved. The silence was absolute, profound, the kind of silence that follows an explosion before the debris starts to fall. Then the courtroom erupted. Reporters surged forward. Cameras flashed. People were shouting questions. The bailiff was calling for order. In the chaos, Barrett sat frozen in his chair, staring at nothing. His face had gone gray. His hands trembled. He looked like a man who had just watched his own execution. Sloane stood up abruptly, grabbing her purse. She looked down at Barrett, and for a moment, something almost like pity crossed her face, but only for a moment. Then she turned and walked out of the courtroom, her heels clicking rapidly, on the marble floor, moving faster and faster until she was almost running. She didn't look back. She had come for a millionaire. She was leaving behind a man who now owned nothing, not even his own name. Mitchell was gathering his papers with shaking hands, already mentally drafting the malpractice insurance claim he would probably need to file. He had brought his client to slaughter and hadn't even known they were walking into the abattoir. Across the aisle, Judith Blackwell closed her briefcase with a quiet click. She placed a hand on Delilah's shoulder and leaned down to whisper, "You did it." "It's over," Delilah nodded slowly. She stood, smoothing the front of her dress, and turned to face the courtroom. The reporters were shouting questions at her, but she didn't hear them. She was looking at Barrett. He finally lifted his head and met her eyes. For the first time in perhaps a decade, he truly saw her, not as the quiet woman in the background, not as the wife he'd outgrown, not as an obstacle to his new life. He saw her as she was, the woman who had owned the land, the woman who had made the wine, the woman who had patiently, methodically, brilliantly built a legal fortress around everything he'd taken for granted. She had let him believe he was king, and all the while, she had been the one holding the kingdom. Delilah reached down and slid the wedding ring off her finger. She looked at it for a moment, the symbol of promises that had turned to ash. Then she walked over to the bailiff's desk and placed it gently on the polished wood. "I won't be needing this anymore," she said quietly. Then she turned and walked toward the courtroom doors. Judith fell into step beside her. The crowd parted. People stepped aside, and Delilah Crane Holloway walked out of the courtroom and into the California sunshine, a free woman. Behind her, Barrett sat alone at his table. The champagne, still in its silver bucket, sat on the floor beside him. The ice had melted. The bottles were warm, the celebration that would never happen. A court clerk approached him. "Sir, you need to clear the courtroom." Barrett looked up at her with hollow eyes. "What? You need to leave. We have another case starting in 15 minutes. He stood slowly, mechanically. Mitchell had already left, probably to call his malpractice insurer and update his resume. The gallery was emptying. In moments, Barrett Holloway stood alone in the courtroom where he had just lost everything. He looked at the champagne bottles. For one absurd moment, he considered opening one anyway, drinking alone, toasting the ruins of his life. But even in his shattered state, he understood how pathetic that would be. He left the bottles where they were and walked out. The courthouse hallway was full of reporters, but they weren't interested in him anymore. They were clustered around Delilah and Judith, asking questions, taking photos. "Tell us, Miss Holloway, how does it feel to reclaim your family's legacy?" Delilah's voice was calm, measured. "It feels like justice. My family built that vineyard over 4 generations. I dedicated my life to making wine that honored that legacy. Today, the court simply recognized the truth, that the empire everyone attributed to my ex-husband was built on land I owned with wine I made, using a partnership agreement he violated. I'm grateful to Judge Pembroke for seeing through the mythology to the facts. Will you continue operating the business?" "Absolutely. We'll be rebranding to our original family name, Crane Estate Wines, and we'll continue making the wine we've always made. Nothing about the product will change, just the man taking credit for it." That line would be quoted in every news story, every blog post, every social media thread about the case. It was perfect, dignified, but devastating. Barrett pushed through the crowd, keeping his head down. No one tried to stop him. No one asked him questions. He was already irrelevant, a footnote in someone else's victory story. He made it to the parking lot and found his car, a Tesla Model S that suddenly felt obscene in its luxury. He sat in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, and stared through the windshield at nothing. His phone buzzed. Text messages flooding in. He looked at the screen. his lawyer, his publicist, his business manager, the board members of 3 charities where he served, a journalist from Wine Spectator. Everyone, suddenly, urgently needed to talk to him. He turned the phone off. He couldn't face them. Couldn't face anyone. He drove home on autopilot, barely aware of the road, the other cars, the world moving around him. Home was a contemporary masterpiece in the Sonoma Hills, all glass and steel and soaring ceilings, worth $12 million. Except it wasn't his. It was on the property that belonged to the Vineyard Estate, which meant it belonged to Delilah now. He pulled into the driveway and sat in the car, staring at the house he would have to leave. Everything inside, all the furniture, the art, the wine collection the temperature-controlled cellar, all of it was tied to the estate. His clothes, his awards, his carefully curated life. Gone. All of it gone. He went inside and walked to his office, poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey from a bottle that cost $500, and sat down at his desk. On the wall were framed magazine covers. Barrett Holloway, Vintner of the Year. The Holloway story, from dirt to dominance. American wine's leading visionary. All lies, or at least all incomplete truths that had metastasized into lies through repetition and ego. He heard a car in the driveway and assumed it was Sloan. But when the door opened, it was his daughter, Grace. She stood in the doorway of his office, looking at him with an expression he couldn't read. Not anger, not sympathy, something closer to exhausted resignation. "I watched the live stream," she said quietly. The court proceedings were public. "I saw everything." Barrett couldn't look at her. "Gracie, I can explain." "You don't need to explain, Dad. I've known for years what you were. I've known about the affairs. I've known how you treated Mom. I've watched you take credit for her work and erase her from the story. I just kept hoping you'd wake up and remember who you used to be. But you never did." He looked up at her. "I did build that business. I worked. I sacrificed." "You worked," Grace agreed, "but you didn't build it alone. And you know what the saddest part is? If you had just been honest, if you had said we built this together, if you had shared the credit and honored the partnership, you'd still have everything. The business, the respect, the family." She shook her head. "But you couldn't do that, because admitting Mom was equal to you felt like diminishing yourself. So you diminished her instead, and now you have nothing. Grace, please. I came to tell you that James and I are supporting Mom. Publicly. We're releasing a statement about how she's the creative force behind Crane Estate Wines and always has been. I thought you should know. You're choosing her side. There are no sides, Dad. There's just the truth. And the truth is, Mom built something beautiful, and you took credit for it until she finally took it back." Grace turned to leave, then paused. "I love you. You're my father, and I'll always love you. But I don't respect you anymore, and I don't think I have since I was 15 and found out about your first affair." She left. Barrett heard the front door close. The sound echoed through the enormous empty house. He sat alone in his office, surrounded by awards and accolades that now felt like participation trophies in someone else's accomplishment. His phone, still off, sat on the desk. He knew when he turned it back on, his world would collapse further. The calls, the questions, the schadenfreude of competitors, the awkward distance of friends who didn't want to be associated with public failure. He thought about Delilah, about the woman he'd met in a hardware store 24 years ago, the woman who had looked at dying land and seen potential, the woman who had taught him everything he knew about wine and asked for nothing but partnership and honesty in return. He had loved her once, truly loved her. When had that love curdled into contempt? When had her quiet competence started to feel like a threat rather than a gift? When had he decided that her contributions were less valuable than his charisma? He couldn't pinpoint the moment. It had been gradual, like a vine slowly dying from root rot. You don't notice until the leaves start to fall. Barrett Holloway sat in his soon-to-be former office and understood finally what he had lost. Not just money, not just property. He had lost his integrity, his family, his daughter's respect, and the partnership with the one person who had ever truly believed in him before he became successful. That loss, he realized, was irreversible. You can rebuild a fortune. You can't rebuild trust once you've burned it to ashes. 6 months later, the transformation was complete. Crane Estate Wines launched with a media blitz that celebrated both the family's four-generation legacy, and Delilah's role as master winemaker. The new labels featured an elegant crane in flight over rolling vineyard. Hills, symbolizing both the family name and Delilah's liberation. Wine Spectator ran a cover story. The real story behind Holloway Estate, how Delilah Crane reclaimed her legacy. The article detailed everything. The land, the loans, the winemaking, the systematic erasure, and finally, the brilliant legal strategy that had restored her ownership. The wine industry, which had always quietly known that Barrett was more salesman than winemaker, embraced the rebrand with enthusiasm. Orders flooded in. Restaurants that had carried Holloway Estate eagerly updated their wine lists to feature Crane Estate. Sommeliers told the story to diners. It had everything: justice, redemption, excellent wine. The first vintage released under the Crane Estate label won double gold at the San Francisco International Wine Competition. Delilah accepted the award wearing a simple black dress, her children on either side of her. She gave a short speech thanking her team, her family, and the legacy of perseverance, passed down through 4 generations of Crane family vintners. She did not mention Barrett. She didn't need to. His absence was the loudest statement of all. Delilah rehired Patricia Owens as head winemaker, giving her the title and salary she should have had all along. She promoted the vineyard manager to chief operating officer. She implemented profit sharing for all employees, ensuring that the people who made the wine shared in its success. She established the Grace and James Crane Scholarship Fund, offering full ride scholarships to young women pursuing degrees in viticulture and enology. The business thrived, not despite Barrett's absence, but in many ways because of it. Without his ego demanding attention and credit, the team worked with a cohesion and joy they'd never experienced before. Delilah was a quiet leader, but an effective one. She listened. She trusted expertise. She made decisions based on what was best for the wine and the land, not what would generate the most impressive headlines. 6 months after the divorce, she stood in the vineyard at sunset, the same vineyard her great-grandfather had planted during Prohibition. The vines were heavy with fruit. 3 weeks from harvest. The light was golden, pouring over the hills like honey. Her son James walked up beside her. He'd graduated from Berkeley and joined the family business, working in the tasting room and learning the operation from the ground up. "The fruit looks good this year," he said. "It does. The weather cooperated. We'll have a strong vintage." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the light change. After a while, James spoke again. "Do you ever regret it? The way it ended with Dad?" Delilah considered the question. "I regret that it had to end that way. I regret that he chose his ego over his family. I regret that my children had to watch their father be publicly exposed as a liar and a cheat." She paused. "But do I regret taking back what was mine? No. I spent 20 years watching my contributions be erased, my work be credited to someone else, my partnership be reduced to a footnote. I forgave betrayal. I endured humiliation. I stayed silent while he built a mythology that wrote me out of my own story." She turned to look at her son. "At some point, James, staying becomes complicity in your own erasure. I chose to survive. I chose to fight for what I'd built. And I chose to ensure that the legacy I leave to you and your sister is one of truth, not mythology." James nodded. "I'm proud of you, Mom, for what you built, and for taking it back." Delilah smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you, sweetheart. That means everything to me." She looked back at the vineyard, at the land that had sustained 4 generations of her family, and felt something she hadn't felt in decades. Peace, not the absence of conflict, but the deep abiding peace that comes from living in alignment with your truth. Barrett Holloway, meanwhile, had tried to start over. He launched a new wine brand called Holloway Signature Collection, using contacts from his previous life to secure distribution. The wine was mediocre. Without Delilah's winemaking expertise, without her land, without the legacy of Crane Vineyard, he had nothing to offer but his name. And his name, post-divorce, carried the stench of scandal and humiliation. The brand failed within 8 months. Distributors dropped him. Retailers sent back unsold inventory. Wine critics, never kind to fallen stars, savaged the wines in reviews that read more like autopsies than assessments. Barrett burned through his savings trying to keep the venture alive. He'd had money in personal accounts, but nowhere near enough to sustain the lifestyle he'd become accustomed to. The house in the hills belonged to Delilah. The yacht was sold to pay debts. The custom suits hung in a closet in a rented condo that felt like a prison cell compared to the estate he'd lost. He tried to get consulting work, offering his expertise to other wineries. But who wanted advice from a man who'd lost his own empire through arrogance and infidelity? Who wanted to be associated with someone whose downfall had been so public, so total, so humiliating? By the 1-year anniversary of the divorce, Barrett Holloway had left California entirely. He moved to Scottsdale, Arizona, where the cost of living was lower and no one in the wine industry would run into him. He took a job selling luxury timeshares, using the same charm and salesmanship that had once sold wine. But selling timeshares to retirees was not the same as selling wine to sommeliers. There was no prestige, no magazine covers, no awards, just commission checks and the grinding realization that he would never again be the person he'd once been. Sloane, predictably, had disappeared from his life the moment the money did. She'd moved on to a tech entrepreneur in San Francisco, upgrading to a younger, wealthier model. Barrett saw photos of her on social media sometimes, draped on a new arm, smiling the same empty smile. He'd thought what they had was love. It had been a transaction. And when his side of the transaction evaporated, so did she. His children maintained minimal contact. Duty calls on birthdays and holidays, brief and awkward. They'd built lives that didn't include him in any meaningful way. Grace was working in environmental policy. James was learning the family business from Delilah. They were Crane children now, not Holloway children. Barrett had destroyed his marriage, forfeited his empire, and alienated his children. And for what? For affairs that had meant nothing. For an ego that demanded constant feeding. For a mythology of self-made success that had required erasing the woman who'd made that success possible. Late at night, alone in his Arizona condo, Barrett would sometimes open a bottle of Crane Estate wine. He'd buy it at the local wine shop, where nobody knew who he was or what he'd lost. He'd pour a glass and taste it, recognizing Delilah's hand in every note. The balance, the complexity, the sense of place. It was extraordinary wine. It had always been extraordinary. And it had never been his. The case became legendary in legal circles. Law schools studied it. The Holloway-Delilah case became shorthand for the dangers of signing contracts without reading them, for the legal consequences of infidelity clauses, and for the importance of documenting contributions in business partnerships. Judith Blackwell's career skyrocketed. She became the attorney every scorned spouse wanted, the one who could find the angle no one else saw and execute it with surgical precision. She gave lectures at law schools, wrote articles for legal journals, and built a practice that specialized in complex divorce cases involving business assets. But she always said that the Holloway case was her masterpiece, not because of the money involved, but because of what it represented. A woman who had been erased, reclaiming her story. A partnership that had been misrepresented, being corrected for the record. Justice, delayed but ultimately delivered. Judge Eleanor Pembroke retired 2 years after the case. In her farewell speech to the Bar Association, she mentioned it specifically. I've presided over thousands of cases in my career. Most of them fade from memory, but some stay with you. The Holloway divorce stays with me, not because of the drama or the dollar amounts, but because it was a stark reminder that the law, when properly applied, can correct even the most entrenched injustices. Mrs. Holloway came to my courtroom erased from her own story. She left as its rightful author. The judge paused, looking out at the assembled attorneys, and Mr. Holloway came to my courtroom with champagne ready to celebrate his victory over a woman he'd underestimated for 23 years. He left with nothing, having learned the hardest lesson a person can learn. That arrogance is not armor. That power built on lies will eventually collapse, and that the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous. The room had erupted in applause. The quote was printed in every legal publication covering her retirement, and in Sonoma County, attorneys still told the story of the champagne in the courtroom, the wife who said nothing and won everything, and the man who lost an empire because he was too arrogant to read what he signed. 3 years after the divorce, Delilah stood in the same courtroom where her life had changed. Not for a legal proceeding this time, but for a ceremony. Judge Pembroke, though retired, had agreed to come back for one special occasion. The Sonoma County Bar Association was presenting Delilah with an award, the Justice and Courage Award, given annually to a non-attorney who had demonstrated extraordinary perseverance in seeking legal remedy for injustice. Delilah accepted the award with grace, giving a short speech that was characteristically humble. I didn't set out to be brave. I set out to survive, to protect what I'd built, to ensure my children inherited truth rather than mythology. If my case helps other people understand their worth and fight for what's theirs, then something good came from a very painful chapter of my life. After the ceremony, Judge Pembroke approached her. They'd stayed in touch, the judge and the woman whose life she'd helped transform. They had coffee occasionally, two women who understood that justice was not always swift, but could be thorough. "How does it feel?" the judge asked. 3 years later, looking back, Delilah smiled. "It feels like I can finally breathe, like I'm living my own life instead of being a supporting character in someone else's story. The vineyard is thriving. My children are happy. I wake up every morning grateful. And, Mr. Holloway," Delilah's expression became thoughtful, "I don't wish him harm. I don't think about him much at all, honestly. He's living his life, whatever that looks like now. I'm living mine. And that separation, that complete disentanglement, is the greatest gift the divorce gave me." Judge Pembroke nodded. "You know, I've seen a lot of people go through divorce. The ones who heal are the ones who let go of anger and simply move forward. You did that. You fought for what was yours, you won, and then you let go of everything else. That takes remarkable strength." "I had good help," Delilah said, gesturing to where Judith Blackwell stood talking to other attorneys. "And I had something worth fighting for. Not revenge, not even money. I was fighting for my legacy, for the truth, for the right to claim my own story." She paused. Barrett built his identity on a lie. When that lie was exposed, he had nothing left. I built my identity on the work itself. The land, the wine, the legacy. Those things can't be taken from me because they were never about him. They were always mine. That evening, Delilah hosted a small dinner at the vineyard. Grace and James were there, along with Patricia, the vineyard manager Judith, and a few close friends who had supported her through the darkest times. They sat on the terrace of the farmhouse as the sun set over the vines, eating food prepared by a local chef and drinking wine from the estate. Patricia raised her glass. "To Delilah, who taught us that patience is power and truth is worth fighting for." Everyone raised their glasses. "To Delilah." Delilah looked around the table at these people she loved. These people, who had stood by her, believed in her, fought alongside her. She looked at the vineyard stretching out in rows of green and gold, heavy with fruit. She looked at the farmhouse her great-grandfather had built with his own hands, and she felt something profound and unshakable. Gratitude, not for what she'd won in court, but for what she'd never lost. Her integrity, her sense of self, her connection to the land and the work. "I want to tell you all something," she said, and the table grew quiet. "When I was going through the worst of it, when Barrett's affairs were public knowledge, and I was trying to decide whether to stay or fight, I had a moment of doubt. I thought, maybe I should just take whatever settlement he offers. Walk away. Start over somewhere else." She paused. "But then I walked the vineyard one morning, like I do every morning, and I realized something. This land doesn't care about my pain. These vines don't care about my marriage or my divorce. They just keep growing, keep producing, keep doing what they were designed to do. And I thought, that's what I need to do. Keep growing, keep producing, keep doing what I was designed to do." She looked at each person around the table. "So I didn't run. I didn't settle for less than I was worth. I fought for what was mine, and I won. But more importantly, I kept growing. And I want to thank all of you for growing alongside me, for believing in me when I struggled to believe in myself, for being part of this story." There were tears around the table. Grace got up and hugged her mother. James joined them. And in that moment, Delilah understood that this was the victory that mattered. Not the courtroom triumph, not the business success. This, family, loyalty, love built on truth rather than mythology. The wine industry never forgot the Holloway-Delilah case. It became a cautionary tale told at conferences and in business schools. The danger of ego, the importance of reading contracts, the consequences of erasing your partner's contributions, the devastating power of a woman underestimated. Barrett Holloway became a footnote in wine history, a cautionary tale, the man who had it all and lost it through arrogance and infidelity. Some people felt sorry for him. Most didn't. He'd had every advantage, every opportunity, and he'd squandered it all for meaningless affairs, and the shallow satisfaction of taking sole credit for shared work. Delilah Crane, on the other hand, became an icon. The quiet winemaker who reclaimed her legacy, the patient strategist who outmaneuvered her unfaithful husband, the woman who proved that real power doesn't announce itself with champagne in courtrooms. It works quietly, documents carefully, and strikes decisively when the moment is right. Wine publications profiled her regularly. She became a mentor to young women in the industry, teaching them not just about winemaking, but about protecting their contributions, insisting on credit, refusing to be erased. She spoke at women's business conferences, telling her story not as revenge porn, but as a lesson in self-worth and strategic thinking. And every year at harvest, she would stand in the vineyard her great-grandfather planted and feel the unbroken thread connecting her to all the Crane family vintners who came before. They had fought to keep this land. They had endured prohibition, depression, war, economic collapse. They had survived everything history threw at them. And now, so had she. She had survived betrayal. She had survived being erased. She had survived a man who tried to take everything and leave her with nothing. And she had done more than survive. She had reclaimed her kingdom. 5 years after the divorce, a journalist asked Delilah if she had any regrets. They were sitting in the vineyard, tasting through the upcoming vintage. The wines were exceptional, balanced, complex, exactly what Crane Estate had become known for. Delilah thought about the question carefully. I regret that my children had to witness their father's fall. I regret the years I spent doubting my worth and accepting less than I deserved. I regret that I didn't fight back sooner. She paused. But do I regret how it ended? No. Because how it ended was justice. The court recognized the truth that I'd been telling myself for years, that I built something extraordinary, that my contributions mattered, that I was never just a supporting character in Barrett's story. I was the author of my own. And Barrett, do you ever think about him? Delilah smiled. Rarely. He's living his life. I'm living mine. And that's exactly how it should be. The best revenge, if you want to call it that, is that I'm thriving. The wine is better than ever. The business is growing. My children are proud of what we've built. I wake up every morning in the house my great-grandfather built, on land that has been in my family for generations, making wine that honors that legacy. She held up her glass, looking at the wine in the sunlight. Barrett lost everything because he built his identity on a lie. I have everything because I built my life on truth. That's the difference. Truth endures. Lies eventually collapse under their own weight. The journalist published the quote. It was shared thousands of times on social media. It appeared on inspirational posters in offices. It became the final word on the Holloway Delilah case. Truth endures. Lies eventually collapse. And in Scottsdale, Arizona, Barrett Holloway read that quote on his phone during a break from showing timeshares to retired couples from Minnesota. He read it 3 times. And for a moment, just a moment, he felt the full weight of what he'd lost. Not the money, not the business. He felt the loss of being someone who mattered. Someone whose work meant something. Someone who could hold up a glass of wine and know, truly know, that he'd created something beautiful. He'd had that once. He'd shared it with a woman who'd loved him before he was successful, who'd taught him everything, who'd been a true partner. And he'd thrown it away for affairs that meant nothing, and an ego that demanded everything. He put his phone away and went back to work. There was nothing else to do. He'd made his choices. He'd signed the document without reading it. He'd betrayed the woman who'd built his empire. And now he lived with the consequences. That's the thing about consequences. They don't care about your regrets. They don't care that you didn't understand what you were signing or that you thought you'd get away with it. They arrive with mathematical precision, and they stay. Barrett Holloway would spend the rest of his life learning that lesson. And Delilah Crane would spend the rest of hers teaching others a different lesson. That patience is power. That documentation is protection. That knowing your worth means fighting for what's yours. And that sometimes the best thing you can do is stay quiet, stay strategic, and let someone else's arrogance become the rope they hang themselves with. Years later, when people asked Delilah what she would tell someone going through what she went through, her answer was always the same. Document everything. Know your worth. Get good legal counsel. Don't react emotionally. Respond strategically. And never, ever underestimate the power of patience. She would pause, smile, and add, oh, and always read what you sign. But make sure the people trying to take advantage of you don't. That usually got a laugh. Because by then, everyone knew the story. Everyone knew about the champagne that was never opened, about the wife who said almost nothing and won everything, about the husband who talked too much, signed too carelessly, and lost an empire in the time it took a gavel to fall. This story isn't just about a divorce. It's about justice. It's about a woman who refused to be erased. It's about the devastating consequences of underestimating someone you've wronged. It's about arrogance meeting its match in patience. It's about truth finally getting its day in court. Barrett Holloway walked into a courthouse with his mistress and champagne, ready to celebrate his victory. He walked out owning nothing, not even the name on the wine he'd spent 20 years claiming as his creation. Delilah Holloway walked into that same courthouse as an erased partner, dismissed and undervalued. She walked out as the sole owner of an empire, with her legacy restored and her truth vindicated. And the champagne? The bottles of Dom Perignon rose that were meant to toast Barrett's freedom? They were left behind in that courtroom, forgotten in the chaos of his downfall. Eventually, a janitor found them and took them home. He shared them with his wife on their anniversary. They had no idea of the story behind the bottles. They just knew the champagne tasted expensive and went perfectly with the quiet joy of a long marriage built on mutual respect. The champagne was delicious, but the story behind it? That tasted like justice. And justice, it turns out, is a flavor that never goes flat, never loses its potency, and never fails to satisfy those who've waited long enough to earn it. So what's the moral of this story? What's the lesson that should stay with you long after you've finished listening? Here it is. Your worth is not determined by who takes credit for your work. Your value is not measured by who acknowledges your contributions. And your power is not diminished by someone else's attempt to erase you. Truth has a way of emerging. Justice has a way of arriving. And patience, real patience, is the most devastating weapon against arrogance you could ever wield. Delilah Crane taught us that quiet strength can defeat loud ego. That documentation beats mythology. That reading the fine print is the difference between protection and vulnerability, and that the person you underestimate today might be the one holding all the cards tomorrow. Barrett Holloway taught us that arrogance is expensive, that betrayal has consequences, that you should always read what you sign. And that champagne brought to celebrate someone else's defeat tastes very different when you're the one who ends up with nothing. If this story resonated with you, if you felt that surge of satisfaction when the judge announced all assets are now hers, if you believe in justice for the underestimated and consequences for the arrogant, then I need you to do something for me right now. Hit that like button. Smash it. Let the algorithm know that stories like this matter. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that patience and preparation can defeat arrogance every single time. And drop a comment below. Tell me, what hit you hardest in Delilah's story? Was it her patience? Her strategy? The moment she placed her wedding ring on the bailiff's desk and walked away free? Let me know, and tell me where you're watching from. Whether you're in California, or Cairo, Texas, or Tokyo, I want to know this story reached you. Or just type "I'm with you, Mr. Hearthline" in the comments. That's all you need to say. Just those 5 words, and I'll know this story mattered to you. If you haven't subscribed to Mr. Hearthline's stories yet, what are you waiting for? We bring you the most compelling, emotionally gripping stories of justice, transformation, and life lessons every single week. Stories about people who fought back, people who refused to be erased, people who turned their pain into power and their setbacks into comebacks. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Because here's what I know. You didn't stumble onto this video by accident. You're here because something in you recognizes the power of a story well told. You're here because you believe that truth matters, that justice matters, that people who've been wrong deserve to win. You're here because you understand that the best stories aren't just entertainment. They're lessons, they're warnings, they're blueprints for how to fight when life backs you into a corner. Delilah Crane's story is all of those things. It's a reminder that the person trying to erase you is often the person most vulnerable to being erased themselves. It's a warning that contracts matter, that words on paper have power, that ignorance is not a defense. It's a blueprint for how to fight strategically rather than emotionally, how to document rather than react, how to build a case rather than just build resentment. And most importantly, it's proof that you can lose everything, be dismissed, underestimated and erased, and still come back to reclaim what's yours. Not through luck, not through connections, but through patience, preparation, and the unwavering belief that you deserve better than you're being offered. So wherever you are right now, whatever battle you're fighting, whatever person in your life has underestimated you or taken credit for your work or betrayed your trust, remember this. The champagne they're planning to open in celebration might never get uncorked. The victory they're so sure of might belong to you instead. And the empire they think they built alone might have your name on the deed all along. Stay patient. Stay strategic. Document everything. Know your worth. And when the moment is right, when you've built your case and gathered your evidence and secured your position, strike with precision. Not with anger, not with drama, just with truth. Because truth, as Delilah proved, is the most powerful weapon you'll ever have. Thank you for being part of the Mr. Hearthline Stories community. Thank you for believing that stories matter, that justice matters, that truth matters. Until next time, remember this. The quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. The most patient person in the fight is often the winner. And the person you're underestimating right now might be the one writing the ending to your story. This is Mr. Hearthline, reminding you that champagne tastes better when you've earned it. Karma never forgets an address, and truth, like fine wine, only gets better with age.